Well, I'm privileged to have my friend and colleague in the pursuit of trying to understand religion, Heather Greene. We've known each other for a number of years. I don't know how or when we first got. I think maybe it was when you were with the Wild Hunt,
Yeah,
perhaps.
I believe it's been about 10 years, I think, probably
Okay,
here and there, just chatting about religion and other good fun stuff like movies.
that's right. Yeah, that's a whole other topic there. But let me read a little bit of your bio, and if you want to add something to it, you can, so people know some about your background. Heather is a freelance editor, writer and journalist in Atlanta, Georgia. She is also currently an acquisitions consultant with Llewellyn Worldwide Limited and the former managing editor of the news journal The Wild Hunt, which we just mentioned. Her work has been published at Religion News Service, Religion Unplugged, The Washington Post, Pathos.com, Circle Magazine, and the Parliament of the World Religions online magazine. Anything you want to add to that, Heather?
Only to say that the work I do, all of that work has centered around religion and pop culture. I'm also a film historian, so I do like that intersection where religion and pop culture and our society meet. So a lot of the work I do is centered around that.
Yeah, well, you and I, thank you for agreeing to have this little brief conversation. We're going to incorporate this video into an overall presentation I'll be giving, where I'm making the argument that Christians need to support religious freedom for all. And it's a part of my presentation where we're looking at examples of how Christians many times trying to restrict the religious freedom of others. And one of those examples comes from paganism. You're a pagan. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, your background?
Sure. I grew up in a mostly secular home with both Jewish family and surrounded by just a diversity of religions in my friends and family. And so I really got the opportunity to explore my spirituality as I grew and found paganism, which manifested with tarot and astrology, some of the stuff normally people come to paganism, but also connection to the earth, um finding that space, the sacred space within the world around me. So that sort of is how I got there. And I've studied Wicca. I've been working with the pagan community for a couple decades now in various formats, mostly in media, and also just learning. And as an acquisitions editor, I get to explore a lot of different types of forms of paganism, and there are many, which I just illustrated for a religion news writers document on what it's, how many types of religions fall under the pagan umbrella, so to speak. So and I've got to explore a lot of those as well, which is both interesting intellectually as well as spiritually.
Well, thanks for that background. The reason you and I are having this conversation is I wanted to not only talk about in a factual kind of way, here's another incident where Christians are trying to restrict the religious freedoms of a minority religion, but we need to hear from somebody in that community. Now, as a journalist and as a pagan, you've written a couple of articles for Religion News Service, and maybe there's been prior coverage in the Wild Hunt. Can you talk about some of the incidents where Christians have tried to restrict the freedom of pagans, even if it's under the moniker of evangelism?
Yeah, sure. And there are countless ones over the years that I've reported on and ones that I've just heard. So, on the lighter sense, for example, and I didn't really do a report much on this, it was a mention in an article, is that this past fall, oh, I'm sorry, this past summer, there was a large pagan conference called Mystic South. And at the conference, littered all over people's cars, as well as in the conference spaces, in the rooms, were pamphlets that were passed out by some Christian group, describing how pagans were pretty much going to hell and convert and all of that kind of stuff. They were very fiery, and really upset the people there who were just simply at a conference trying to learn from each other, to have ritual, to worship, to bond with like minds. So that is a light version, and I say light because it wasn't as abusive. It was moderate compared to, and this is the key part, why am I calling it light, compared to, for example, one report I did was a woman who lives in Alabama who's a witch. She was at an event in the middle of the state, so it was pretty rural, And they were having I think she said 30 to 50 pagans were there. It was for a holiday, one of the Sabbaths. I don't remember which one. And they were in a big circle and someone was speaking and they were, I don't know at what point of the ritual they were at, but at that time there had been some gathering of a local Christian group had gathered on the backside and started screaming. And it turned out to be a preacher and about 10, I think she said, men that were part of his church. They didn't just stay on the outskirts of this space. They eventually came into the space, littered themselves among the pagans and started harassing them and started calling out and speaking and started physically pushing, but pushing their voices louder than the other ones. They actually invaded the sacred space. And so you have anything from the pamphlets, which are just littered, which are offensive to the people, but to the point of in the physical invasion of a sacred space and a sacred worship. So those are two examples, and I could give you 10 or 15. I think the most recent article was the one in New York City, where the street preachers were drowning out, and they had to stop some of the workshops going on, the pagan workshops, because they were drowning out the pagan teachers with their megaphones and harassing people, actually not physically, but harassing people with their voices.
Now, I'm trying to anticipate a Christian response. Some might say, well, you're not suggesting that we don't do evangelism. My take on it, and you give me your feedback as a pagan, is that perhaps it's possible for Christians to use, well-intentioned, to use their feelings that they need to be engaged in evangelism and sharing their message, but it functions in such a way as it restricts the religious freedoms of others, and it's hardly persuasive in the process. What would your feeling be on that?
Yeah, I understand that in some religions, evangelism is part of the belief system. So to ask them not to evangelize would be infringing on their belief system, and I understand that. While it's hard to stomach sometimes, if it's done, I think I really get back to the notion of just basic human respect for another human being's life, space, sacred space, just them as a person. So, if you want to share your viewpoint, just like we all do, right? It's much more effective and much more respectful to do that in a calm way, in a space of peace, using words that are inclusive and welcoming, rather than the fiery stuff that we saw in the pamphlets. For example, you're going to hell. That's not a way to begin the teaching approach, right? And I think if you sit down, and we were talking about this earlier, is that if you take the approach of teaching and sharing across a dinner table, breaking bread with the person, sharing a glass of wine, making a meal, whatever that case is, it's a wonderful human tradition. It's what people are going to listen more. Whether they're going to convert, that's a whole nother story, but that's a way to start the conversation, if that's what you need to do, if that's part of your belief system, rather than standing outside of a sacred event, a church, a temple, a pagan circle, and trying to shout over them. That's not going to win any hearts or minds.
Right.
So I come from a point of, everyone should start sharing their religious beliefs, which is a very tough thing, from the beginning point of human respect, human decency for each other, respect for each other, and respect that we're all here with the same goal of living in a sacred space, whatever we call it. So if you start from that spot, it's a lot easier.
I think it's important for my audience to understand not only the facts about these incidents, but also how it's received. How do you and other pagans feel when Christians are in these spaces and you're trying to exercise freely the rights that you have as an American to practice your religion, and you come and have these people interrupt this space? How does that make you feel?
Well, and I can't speak for everybody,
Sure.
but I can share some of the things people have told me when I've done reports on them. One is fear, especially when the space is invaded, like the New York City incident, which was a street fair. If if they invade the space, or like the Alabama is, you become fearful for your body physically, and I mean literally fearful. You're afraid you're going to be pushed. You're afraid you're going to be punched. You know, that kind of fear. And there's a history of very marginalized religions having abuse. You know, we can look back at all kinds of the smaller minority religions experiencing physical abuse. You also are angry. You're angry that you're not being left alone, that you're doing this peaceful event to share and be amongst community. You're excited about it, whether it's a ritual or a festival, and that it's being invaded. You're angry that these people are not allowing you to practice your faith. And then there's a resentment. And I think these events just breed and grow resentment towards certain groups. And so it's directed first at the group that's there, the small group, the preacher, the church community, whatever it is. And that grows to resentment against Christianity as a whole. You know, and a lot of people have come from Christianity. A lot of pagans have converted from Christianity. So they left it for a reason, because it didn't fit with their spirituality. And then to have this happen just kind of feeds that thought process, so to speak. So you have anger, you have fear, you have resentment. And, you know, and then there's always the reaction. We're not doing that outside of churches. Pagans don't stand outside of churches. They don't go into a church and start worshiping the goddess and start singing the chants for ritual. They don't do that. So they say, why just leave us alone? Why not just leave us and our events alone? We're not doing anything to anybody.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I want to thank you for taking a few moments out of your busy schedule and sharing not only the background about what's going on, but how you and others in the pagan community might feel about it. My hope is that we can begin in our community to practice and apply the golden rule. Treat others and engage others as you want to be treated. So thank you so much, Heather.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I appreciate your time and all the work you do, John.
Great. Thanks so much.